Tsavo Reserve, late morning. The sun pressed down hard over the dry gully where the wind no longer moved the dust. Cracks ran like veins through the compacted earth, split open by heat and time. 2 days ago, a tremor had shaken the southern ridge, not strong enough to be noticed by the towns, but enough to shift the loose rock and soil where the old dens sat hidden beneath scrub. Juma walked carefully now, the soles of his boots testing each patch of land before committing weight. He wasn't searching for anything, not exactly, but something had drawn him back here, a feeling that the place hadn't settled yet. He heard it first, faint and strange, a sound too low to be wind, too short to be bird. He stopped. The acacia above him didn't move. The dry pods on the ground were still. Then again, a muffled cry like air escaping a closed space. He turned toward the slope where a cluster of thorn roots clung to the edge of a fresh scar in the hillside. The earth had collapsed, forming a steep basin of broken clay and sheared root systems. Juma moved toward it slowly, scanning for movement. The sound came once more. Then silence. He crouched at the rim of the collapse, eyes narrowing. The soil was disturbed, not just from the slide itself, but scraped, uneven. Something had shifted from beneath. Then he saw it. A paw, caked in fine dust, barely visible where the packed soil dipped. No movement, no breath, just one limp paw, as if forgotten by the rest of the body. Juma stood quickly and radioed to the station. His voice stayed low and even. He requested tools, cloth, and water. No vehicles, no shouting. By the time the others arrived, Juma was already cutting away the surface roots with a small knife. He didn't dig, not yet. Every handful of soil had to be cleared by touch. The scent of dry animal lingered faintly in the air, musk and earth and something else, heavier, more recent. The others joined him, 2 rangers with quiet hands and cotton towels to lay the soil on. They didn't speak much, only once when one ranger whispered, "Still breathing?" and Juma replied, "Not sure yet." An hour passed before they uncovered the shoulder, then the ribs. The lion was fully grown, a male, but thin. His mane was brittle and dust-heavy, the tips matted into points. When they reached the head, Juma paused. The lion's eyes were shut, lashes rimmed with dry grit. His mouth was parted just enough to show his gums, pulled back from the teeth. A soft wheeze passed through the nose, not a breath exactly, but close. They worked faster now, clearing the legs, brushing around the flanks. No heavy bleeding. One long scrape ran along the lion's side, but it wasn't fresh. He'd been trapped for more than a day, maybe 2. The den had collapsed inward, sealing him into a pocket of shallow air. If the ground had settled just a few inches lower, the weight would have broken his ribs. If he'd moved too early, he might have buried himself deeper. Now, with the last of the soil removed from his hind legs, the lion gave a single low exhale, like a sigh emptied of force. One eye opened slightly. The pupils were dull, but he saw them. Juma laid a folded cloth over the lion's face, shielding him from the light. Another ranger wet a rag and touched it gently to the paw. Still no movement. They would not lift him yet. If the lion's spine had taken damage in the collapse, moving him now could end it. But they couldn't wait long. If the sun climbed higher, the temperature would make survival even harder. If he breathes, he can move, Juma said quietly. If he moves, he might survive. They began constructing a canvas drag. No frame, just fabric and belts. The lion shifted once, his back leg twitching. It wasn't enough. He wouldn't get up on his own. 2 rangers looped rope under his chest and lifted slowly. No sound came from him, no resistance, but his weight held. The walk to the enclosure would be long and slow. If the lion lost consciousness again, there'd be no way to know until he stopped breathing. But they started moving anyway. 1 step, 1 breath, One silent stretch of heat-struck land between where he had almost disappeared and where he might begin again. They moved slow along the gully's spine. The canvas stretcher bowed under the lion's weight. Each footstep raised thin bursts of dust, falling across his back and mane in a dry shimmer. His body didn't flinch. No twitch, no sound. His breathing remained shallow, each exhale barely disturbing the cloth they had placed to shield his eyes. The heat pressed harder now, sliding over them like invisible weight. If they stopped moving, it would settle deeper into the lion's skin. If they moved too fast, they could lose him. Neither choice was safe, but still they walked. It was Juma who watched the ribs. His eyes kept tracking the rise and fall, short, uneven, slow. The lion's frame had no fat left. His shoulders were blunt with bone. Each step of the men shifted the skin over joints that had long since stopped being used. This was not an old lion. He should have been strong. He should have had a pride, cubs maybe, a mate nearby. But the den they uncovered held nothing. No scent trails but his. No tracks in or out. No signs of recent feeding. Just collapsed dust and one hollowed body trying not to disappear. They reached the shaded holding area just after midday. The enclosure was nothing more than canvas stretched between posts, with one corner dug into earth for coolness. It was used for injured animals too wild to be transported further. A place for quiet, not confinement. They laid him in the deepest shade, placing soaked cloth beneath his head and chest. His eyes remained closed. A fly landed briefly near his nostril. He didn't move. The team cleared the area, giving the lion silence. Juma stayed behind, crouched nearby. He whispered once, "You're safe here," and poured a slow line of water beside the paw. The lion didn't drink, but his ear twitched slightly, registering sound or scent. Juma leaned back. That one movement was enough to mean something. For the next hour, they waited. A bird called once in the distance. The heat began to thin as light shifted toward afternoon. Juma made notes. Temperature normal but low. Respiration shallow. No vocalizations. No response to scent. The words were clinical, but behind each note was the same thought. If he doesn't move by nightfall, his organs could begin to shut down. If he doesn't take water, he won't make it through the second night. Late in the afternoon, the lion stirred. Not much, a single shift of the back leg. Then a soft cough, dry and thin. His jaw opened slightly, and a small clump of dust fell from his mouth. Juma stood quickly but didn't move closer. The lion's tongue flicked out once, barely touching the soil. A minute passed. Then his eyes opened. Not wide, just enough to see the world dimly. His gaze didn't land anywhere. It floated. Juma held his breath. The lion blinked slowly and turned his head toward the waterline on the ground. One paw dragged slightly forward, toes splayed from weakness. Then he stopped. That was all he had. But it was a choice. He had moved. He had looked. He had not let himself fall back into stillness. They brought water closer now, using a soaked cloth laid across a shallow tin. The lion's tongue moved again. 2 licks, 3. Not enough, but real. His flanks trembled once, a signal of pain returning to the nerves. They watched him carefully. Hydration could bring shock. Movement could break bone if something was fractured. But the risks were now worth taking. Stillness would kill him faster than pain. As the sun dropped lower, the enclosure grew quiet. The lion lay with his head angled toward the fading light, mane heavy with earth. There were no other lions nearby. No answering call. No scent of another pride. He had come from that den alone. If he'd had companions, they hadn't made it out, or they had left him. Juma didn't speculate. He only wrote it plainly in the report. No visible sign of pride. Male is underweight. No protective behavior displayed. Likely isolated for some time. Wind moved faintly through the canvas edge. Dust scattered in small spirals along the ground. The lion's chest rose again, slow, ragged, but still moving, still here. They carried him at dusk. The canvas dipped low beneath the lion's weight, though he weighed less than he should have. His legs hung limp over the sides, not dragged but placed, the way only something injured can surrender. Flies followed in small spirals drawn by the scent of dried blood and dust. Juma walked at the rear, eyes fixed on the lion's side, watching for movement. Any small tremble of skin or breath or muscle twitch. There was nothing but the soft rise and fall of his ribs, slower now in the cooling air. The team moved with practiced quiet. They didn't speak unless necessary. Each footstep pressed into the dry ground, careful not to jolt the stretcher. The path was narrow and uneven, and twice they had to shift their grip when roots forced a bend. Still, the lion made no sound. Not a grunt, not a low growl of pain. Only once did he blink, slowly, as a thorn branch brushed the edge of his paw. Juma noted it. Response to contact. But his ears didn't flick. His tail stayed still. Whatever was keeping him quiet went deeper than the wound on his flank. The enclosure stood waiting under the last orange light of day. A cleared patch with soft dirt and a low shade barrier. It wasn't meant for lions, not exactly, but it had held larger animals in crisis, elephants in shock, buffalo too dazed to stand. Juma signaled the team to lower him gently. As the canvas settled, the lion's head turned slightly toward the tree line. His eyes remained open, dull, still, watching nothing. They backed away slowly. A bowl of water was placed near his front leg. One of the rangers whispered, "He's not even afraid," and Juma replied, "He doesn't have the strength." He crouched beside the lion again, no closer than necessary. The wound on the flank was shallow but long, a jagged scrape from stone. Not bleeding now, just raw, exposed, layered in earth. He noted no sign of infection yet, but the lion's immune system could already be compromised. If they moved him too early or waited too long, he would not recover. Either choice came with risk. As the last light dropped behind the hills, Juma listened carefully. No calls from the brush, no other lions in earshot. The silence became its own kind of warning. A lion this size should have roared by now, even in pain, even in confusion. But there was no sound from his throat, not even a rasp. His mouth opened once, just as slightly, and closed again. His tongue remained dry. His chest rose, then fell again, slower. Juma touched the cloth at the lion's shoulder and spoke softly. "Rest now." Stillness returned. The lion's tail curled faintly, the first voluntary movement since the rescue. A minute passed, then another. The sky deepened. Bats passed overhead, and then the quiet resumed its grip. Juma took one final look at the lion's ribs. They still moved, shallow, rhythmic, just enough. But if the silence stayed too long, it would mean something else entirely. What's at risk now is the delay in response. If the lion doesn't stand within 2 days, his muscles may begin to atrophy further. If dehydration continues overnight, organ failure becomes more likely. If internal bleeding exists and remains hidden, they will not know until it's too late. Still, they will not rush. Calm allows the body to choose life. Panic does not. They left him there under the shade cover, watched from a distance. The bowl of water remained untouched, but the eyes did not close. They stayed open until the stars came out, until the last human footstep was gone. A breath, then another, a life, waiting quietly inside itself. The night passed without sound. No growls, no shifting of weight, no scraping against the enclosure walls. Just the slow, dry rhythm of breath, and even that faded at times, shallow enough to doubt. By morning, the water bowl was only half disturbed, more soaked into the dust than taken in. The meat brought at dawn remained untouched. Flies began to circle, waiting for permission that never came. Juma watched from a short distance, crouched low, scribbling quietly into a notepad. The lion had opened his eyes only once, briefly, when the sun reached the edge of his enclosure. Then closed them again. Not in sleep, just absence. Juma stepped forward and slid the bowl closer. The lion didn't move. His ribs rose and fell, slow and visible, but his body remained slack. When the wind shifted and carried the scent of other animals, buffalo, baboons, a nearby female leopard calling from the rocks, the lion didn't flinch. His ears stayed low. His muscles gave no signal of alertness. Lions are wired for territory, for sound, for scent, but this one showed no recognition, no memory, no trace of the world around him. Juma stepped back and said nothing for a long time, then quietly, "He's alone in his head." The injury along the lion's flank had begun to dry and tighten, the edges darkening into early scab. It wasn't life-threatening on its own. The real danger now came from within. Loss of appetite, prolonged stillness, silence in the presence of other predators, these were not symptoms of injury. They were signs of something else. In lions, trauma can sit heavy. When bonds are broken or when the pride is lost violently, survivors can shut down. No roaring, no response, just breath, then less breath until the body follows. Juma reviewed the collapse site again that afternoon. Not in person this time, but in photos. The layout had been odd. No obvious pride markings, no fresh dung piles, but there had been disturbed ground beyond the den's edge. A second depression in the soil, smaller. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. He does now. He made a note to revisit it before dusk. For now, he stood at the edge of the enclosure again, arms folded, watching the lion's chest. There were no wounds on the neck, no visible bone fractures, but still no sound. Even a growl would be something. A warning, a refusal. But the silence was hollow. Not peaceful, not stubborn, just hollow. The lion lifted his head once that afternoon, just enough to shift the dust under his chin. His eyes opened halfway. The irises were dulled, clouded faintly, not from age but from dehydration and fatigue. He looked toward the canvas wall, not at the ranger, not at the water, not at the sun. Then let his head fall gently back into the earth, not dropped, just lowered, as if nothing was worth the effort to keep it there. Juma knelt slowly and placed a hand against the edge of the bowl. He didn't speak this time. There was nothing left to encourage. Encouragement only mattered when something inside the animal still reached outward. Now the goal was preservation. Keep the body alive long enough to see if the spirit follows. If not, no drug or intervention would matter. If a lion no longer wants to live, he simply won't. He stood and walked to the edge of the shade. Behind him the flies buzzed softly, circling but never landing. The lion's skin flicked once at the base of his tail. An instinct, not a choice. If he doesn't eat by nightfall, liver function could begin to decline. If he doesn't respond to new sounds by morning, neurological suppression becomes more likely. If he doesn't move on his own, bed sores will form beneath the skin, and recovery will slow beyond reversal. The clock was moving. The lion was not. By evening, a breeze passed through the tall grass beyond the enclosure. A soft sound, dry and slow, like something being combed gently by time. The lion's ear twitched faintly once, but his eyes stayed closed, and the bowl remained full. The sun was still low when Juma left camp. The lion hadn't moved since nightfall. No water, no food, no shift in posture. Just the same hollow breath, slow and steady like something borrowed. There had been no vocalizations in the dark. Not from him, not from anything nearby. The bush had gone still. Juma had seen cases like this before, but rarely in a lion, and never one this silent. He needed to go back, not for answers but for something else. Anything else. The earth didn't cave in for no reason, and silence didn't come from pain alone. The gully was colder than he remembered. Shadows held longer in the cracks, and the air near the collapse was still damp from where the soil had compacted. A crow lifted from a branch overhead as Juma stepped down, following the same edge where they'd uncovered the lion days earlier. The scent had faded now, just dust and dry root. He walked beyond the first slide, stepping carefully across a narrow break in the slope, where dry leaves collected in a windless pocket. That's where he saw the marks. Not paw prints. Those would have been long blown away. These were scratches. Thin, deliberate, dragged into the dirt near a narrow break in the rock wall. Not from claws in motion. These looked like scraping from inside where something had tried to pull forward but hadn't cleared the edge. 4 lines, then another set. Shallower, shorter, then nothing. Juma knelt and pressed his hand to the earth. The space was too small for a lion to fit fully inside, but deep enough for a cub. The air inside smelled sharp, not fresh. He leaned closer. Decay. Faint but real. Not fresh death, not recent blood. Just time and heat, and something gone too long. He looked again at the scratch lines, then at the slope above. The den had likely split during the slide, separating its chambers. The adult had survived the collapse. What had been beside him hadn't. He rose slowly, tracing the slope with his eyes. A second shallow depression lay just 20 feet up, half filled with drifted soil. He cleared it gently with a stick. Bones, small and dry. A leg, clean at the joints. A rib, not scattered. Resting close together as if the body had curled before stilling. No scavenger had gotten in. Too deep, too sealed. It had been buried, not abandoned. Likely alive when the cave came down. Likely calling. Juma crouched in the silence. No sounds carried through the gully. No insects hummed. Just the wind brushing along the upper branches. He stood again, breathing through his mouth, not from the scent, but from the weight. If the lion had been trapped alongside a cub, his own or one he was guarding, it explained the silence, the stillness. Trauma in lions rarely shows in wounds. It shows in what they stop doing. Eating, moving, claiming space with sound. Survival isn't just breath. It's instinct. And his had gone quiet. By midday, Juma marked the site with a small strip of cloth. Not for burial, for memory. It would be recorded later, cleaned carefully. Bones collected, cause documented. But not today. Today was about understanding. The lion hadn't been left behind. He had survived, alone. Whatever was beside him hadn't. Back at the enclosure, the light had shifted. Dust moved across the ground in soft, dry waves. The lion's position hadn't changed, but his eyes were open now, blinking slowly toward the edge of the trees. When Juma approached, the lion didn't lift his head, but his ears moved, once toward the ranger, then toward the sky. A soft fly landed on his paw. He flicked it away gently. If the lion didn't begin eating by morning, the failure of vital systems would follow. The stress of starvation had already altered his immune response, but now, at least, they understood. He wasn't just recovering from injury. He was grieving something buried. The wind moved again, soft, through the tall grass at the edge of the camp. The cloth marking the gully caught it faintly, flicked once, then lay still again. The wind had quieted by nightfall. Thin dust hung in the air without direction, and the insects stayed low, moving in short, silent arcs near the lanterns. Juma sat just outside the enclosure, a notepad in his lap, his eyes half fixed on the lion's still form. The adult hadn't moved again since morning. No water, no change in breath. The wound on his flank had darkened slightly, not yet infected, but drier now, the skin pulling inward. What little light reached the canvas walls faded to a muted glow. Juma leaned forward, exhaled, and closed the notebook. There was little more to write. A minute passed, then another, and then sound. Soft. Off rhythm. Not the wind, not the lion. Yuma turned his head slowly, not rising, listening. The sound came again, a shuffle, then a dry crackle of grass. Not loud, but near. He stood without speaking and stepped to the edge of the brush. What emerged wasn't expected. Not a scavenger, not another ranger. It was a cub. Small, underfed, dust clinging to every joint. The fur on its back had hardened into clumps, matted by old dirt and sun. It moved with an unsteady limp, one paw dragging slightly behind, the other three carrying too much weight. Its ribs pressed tight against the skin. Its eyes were open but glazed. It looked forward without focusing, following some invisible thread it had chosen to believe in. Juma stayed still. The cub didn't look up. It didn't cry out. It simply walked, slow, unsure, the way animals do when instinct overrides exhaustion. It passed the corner post, sniffed the edge of the shade cloth, then paused near the bowl outside the lion's enclosure. Its nose twitched, picking up something familiar in the dust. Then, as if the effort had been too much, it folded down at the base of the wall, body curved tight, legs tucked. No collapse, just surrender. Juma knelt nearby. He didn't speak. The cub's chest moved faintly, mouth slightly open, tongue dull and dry. A breath whistled once through the nostril. Then silence. Still breathing, but not for long if left unattended. He retrieved a damp cloth and placed it in the dust. The cub did not move. But its paw stretched slowly, just enough to brush the edge. A few grains of damp soil clung to its lip as it sniffed. Not a drink, but a question. Enough. The lion inside the enclosure shifted. The sound was faint, a limb moving across the dry canvas floor. Juma turned back. The lion's eyes were open now, fixed not on the ranger but on the corner where the cub lay. He didn't rise, but his head tilted slightly, just enough to see the form pressed low to the ground. His nostrils flared once, then again, slow and wide. No roar, no growl, but his body pressed forward a fraction, paw curling under him. His mane shifted with the effort. He was watching. Juma stepped back. If they were related, and it seemed more likely now that they were, reuniting them would offer something beyond medical care. But the risk remained. The adult was unstable, weakened. If the cub was not his, confusion or territorial instinct could follow. If it was, the bond might not hold under trauma. Yet even hesitation came with its own cost. If they were separated again, either might stop responding entirely. Juma unlatched the canvas door. He opened it just wide enough. The cub lifted its head. Slowly. A pause. Then it crawled forward, dragging one paw, then the next. The adult did not move. His breath held steady. Only when the cub reached the edge of the mat inside did he lean in. His nose met her back. Then lingered along her spine. A soft exhale, almost a sigh. Then, with deliberate slowness, he lowered his head and rested it beside her. Not over. Beside. By the time the stars showed clearly above the tree line, the cub's body had curled into his chest. Her breathing slowed to match his. Juma backed away quietly, leaving the cloth where it was. Wind brushed across the top of the canvas and disappeared again into the trees. Nothing more moved, but the silence now felt full, not empty. The morning held a softer heat, not cool but slow to rise, the kind of warmth that didn't press but lingered. Inside the enclosure, the dust had settled where the two lions lay, the adult still stretched along the shaded corner. The cub curved tightly into his chest. Their bodies touched, not out of comfort, but necessity. Survival, still fragile, had begun to take shape not through motion, but presence. The small one stirred first. Her hind legs kicked faintly against the canvas floor. She stretched her neck forward, jaw parting as if to call. No sound came, but the motion caught something deeper. The lion lifted his head. It was not fast, not a reflex. The muscles along his shoulders pulled slowly, trembling with the effort. His chin rose from the ground, coated in dry earth. His eyes opened wide for the first time since his rescue, and for several long seconds he only looked, not at the ranger standing nearby, not at the bowl of water, but at her, the cub. Her body shivered once, a full-bodied twitch that left her breathing uneven. Then she moved, dragging her front legs toward him before her back gave out. She collapsed just beneath his paw, ribs heaving. The lion leaned in. No sound passed from his throat, but his mouth opened slightly, and with the gentlest motion, he brushed his tongue once against the side of her face. The sand along her ear lifted, clinging to the rough edge of his tongue. He licked again, slower this time, then placed his chin behind her neck, holding her close with the shape of his body. Juma watched from the outer fence, unmoving. It was the first voluntary act the adult had made since the den collapse. Not just lifting his head, but choosing connection. It didn't cure anything. His strength was still poor, and the cub was too weak to nurse or feed. But this was no longer a passive body waiting for failure. It was something responding to life again. A ranger approached with a bowl of diluted goat's milk, warmed slightly in the early sun. They left it just inside the enclosure's edge, not too close. If either lion drank, it would confirm what this moment only suggested. That recovery had begun. Juma didn't push. He remained outside, patient, listening. The enclosure was quiet, but no longer empty. A presence lived in the air now. Faint, shared breath, weight redistributing across the lion's spine as he adjusted, curling his body protectively around the cub's flank. What's at risk remains. If the cub doesn't take fluid soon, dehydration will overtake her. If the adult regresses into stillness, the brief moment of connection will not be enough. But every gesture matters now. A look, a shift, a breath directed toward another. The cub stirred again. Her front paw stretched and touched the lion's leg, pressing against it lightly before falling back. The contact lasted less than a second, but the lion responded. His tail flicked once, then settled. He didn't return to sleep. He watched her. By mid-morning, the lion turned his head toward the bowl. He didn't drink, but he smelled it, held the scent, and didn't turn away. His breath deepened, drawing dust into the shape of slow, widening rings near his muzzle. The cub pressed her nose into his fur, and her jaw moved softly, searching. Juma stepped away as the sun began to rise over the eastern ridge. The grass beyond the enclosure bent with the light wind, rustling against the canvas walls. Two bodies now moved in tandem, two chests rising, then falling. The silence no longer felt like absence. It had become rest. 2 weeks passed without rush. No schedule pressed them, no milestone was forced. The lion's body recovered slowly, each day marked by one small return. The first full drink of water, a short rise to his elbows, a shift from lying to sitting without collapse. He did not roar, he did not mark territory, but his eyes cleared and he began to watch the horizon again. His frame filled out, no longer starved, but not yet full. What strength returned came through rest, not struggle. The cub stayed curled beside him most days, standing only to follow when he moved. Her gait was still uneven, and her ribs still showed. But she walked. Juma recorded everything in quiet margins. Intake levels, muscle restoration, temperature against the canvas in the morning. Most days he sat near the enclosure just after sunrise, saying nothing, watching the way the lion breathed. It had changed. It was steadier now, deeper. When the wind moved, his ears turned again. When a shadow passed overhead, he blinked with awareness, not confusion. These small signs meant more than any diagnostic could. He had come back to himself, and not alone. By the 13th day, both lions were standing without struggle. Not for long, but long enough to pace the edge of the enclosure. The cub pressed close with each step, brushing his front leg with her shoulder, leaning slightly when she lost her balance. He tolerated it without shifting. When she collapsed in rest, he curled his body around hers in an arc of protection. She no longer trembled in sleep. What remained at risk now was adaptation. If released too soon, the adult could face territorial conflict. If held too long, the cub's instincts might dull. But the decision had to be made with the body, not just data. And the body, at last, had begun asking for space. The lion stood at the door before dawn on the 15th day. Ears forward, tail swaying once. Not restless, just ready. Juma rose slowly and walked to the gate. He paused, not out of hesitation, but respect. The lion met his eyes. Not with recognition, lions don't remember the way people do, but with a stillness that no longer held fear. Juma slid the latch. The door opened without sound. For a moment, neither lion moved. The wind passed low over the grasses beyond the trees. Then, without instruction, the adult stepped forward. The cub followed, her small frame pressed into his shadow. Their tails touched once, then again, brushing like threads loosely tied. They walked without pause. No backward glance, no cry, just steps through the narrow space between canvas and wild. Juma didn't follow. He remained near the gate, one hand resting on the frame. The sun broke across the treetops, catching in the lion's mane, softening the curve of his back as it bent slightly toward the cub. Their shapes grew smaller with each step, not hurried, not cautious, just moving in rhythm, a weight shared, a path found. The wind picked up gently, drawing lines across the tall grass, flattening it in long, swaying waves. The tracks they left were shallow, but they remained for now, where the dust still held memory.